What if I told you one of America's most beloved TV personalities died with secrets no one ever expected? Behind every dusty antique and neon sign he found, Frank Fritz was quietly hiding a story of heartbreak, betrayal, and mystery. He wasn't just a picker. He was a man chasing ghosts, holding on to forgotten treasures while the world slowly forgot about him. And after his tragic death, loved ones uncovered something in his garage so personal, so shocking, it changed everything we thought we knew about him. This is the untold story of Frank Fritz. Behind every collector's obsession lies a personal story, a trail of memories, meaning, and heartbreak buried under layers of dust. For Frank Fritz, the story didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. It didn't even end when he vanished from our screens. It ended in silence, in a cluttered garage, with a tarp-covered secret that revealed the part of Frank the world never really knew. Frank wasn't your typical television star. He didn't chase red carpets or designer suits. His world revolved around rusted signs, dented toys, neon clocks, gas pumps, and vintage motorcycles. And yet, millions came to know and love him. Not because he tried to be someone else, but because he didn't. He was simply Frank. But the story of how he got there and how it all ended is something far more complicated and far more heartbreaking than most fans ever realized. Frank Fritz was born on October 11, 1965, in Davenport, Iowa, a blue-collar Midwestern town where hard work and worn-out denim meant more than titles or fancy last names. It was a place of grit, elbow grease, and old American steel. The kind of town where people fixed their own fences, knew their neighbors by name, and every diner booth came with a pot of black coffee and a story. Frank's family wasn't rich. Far from it. Money was tight and luxuries were rare. But what Frank lacked in material things, he made up for in curiosity. A boundless, strange, beautiful fascination with the things other people left behind. While other kids chased footballs and traded superhero comics, Frank was the one crawling under porches and sifting through junk piles. He didn't care about shiny, new toys. He cared about the bottle caps rusting in the dirt, the broken lighters in the gutter, and the cigar tins half buried by tree roots. He'd spend hours rearranging old beer cans by shape and color, not for any prize or praise, but because there was something about the history in those objects that spoke to him. Frank's room didn't look like other kids' bedrooms. There were no posters of rock stars or athletes on the walls. Instead, it looked like a flea market exploded. Shelves sagged under the weight of antique tins, cracked license plates, and cigar boxes filled with marbles and bottle openers. On his dresser sat shoeboxes crammed with stamps, faded postcards, and discarded keys whose locks no longer existed. Every corner of his space told a story, or at least hinted at one. And for Frank, that was enough. Even his teachers noticed he was different. While others doodled race cars and cartoon characters, Frank sketched old motorcycles and vintage signs. His classmates may not have understood it, but they respected it. Frank was the kid who could turn up at show and tell with a railroad spike from the 1800s or a Coke bottle from the Prohibition era. Long before he became a television personality, Frank Fritz was a storyteller. Not with words, but with objects the rest of the world forgot. That curiosity wasn't just a childhood phase. It was the start of something much bigger. After graduating high school, Frank took a job as a fire inspector in Davenport. It was respectable work, steady pay, and good benefits. But on weekends, he was someone else. He'd hit the back roads, poking through estate sales, junkyards, and farm auctions across Iowa and beyond. While others saw junk, Frank saw treasure. He didn't see a dented lunchbox. He saw a kid's memory from 1956. He didn't see an oil can, he saw a piece of working-class Americana. By the early 2000s, Frank had a reputation. People knew he had an eye. He could walk into a barn and find a gem in 30 seconds flat. Sellers started calling him directly when they needed to clear out their garages or attics. He was friendly, reliable, and charmingly scruffy. It wasn't long before this side hustle began to look like a second career. That's when Mike Wolf entered the picture. Mike had been picking for years too. They weren't best friends, but they shared a love for history buried in rust. Mike had a vision. He wanted to turn picking into a show. Not scripted, not flashy, just real people on the road chasing stories. He believed Frank had the kind of charm that viewers would connect with. And he was right. Frank quit his job, went full-time into picking, and launched Frank's Finds. He and Mike began traveling together, filming their adventures and pitching the concept to networks. It took time, But eventually, the History Channel came calling. In 2010, American Pickers premiered. The concept was simple: two guys in a van driving across rural America, rummaging through barns, garages, and sheds for overlooked treasures. But the magic wasn't in the items, it was in the people. Frank stood out from the start. His flannel shirts, bushy beard, quick wit, and wide smile made him instantly familiar, like the guy you'd meet at a diner and swap stories with over black coffee. And viewers loved him for it. While Mike often pursued the high-value flips, Frank had a soft spot for the oddball collectibles, quirky lunchboxes, vintage toys, obscure signs. He wasn't chasing profit. He was chasing connection. That's what made the show work. It wasn't just about the antiques, it was about the heart behind them. As the show took off internationally, Frank became more than just a co-host. He became a piece of Americana himself. People from all over the world tuned in not just to see what they found, but to see what Frank would say, how he'd react, or what kind of offbeat story he'd uncover. His laugh, his honesty, his reverence for even the weirdest items made him unforgettable. But success came with a price. As the years rolled on, Frank's energy began to shift. He looked tired. His movements slowed. The twinkle in his eye dimmed ever so slightly. What fans didn't know was that Frank had been living with Crohn's disease, a painful and exhausting condition that made filming grueling. Years of lifting heavy antiques and crawling through barns had also taken a toll on his back. And behind the scenes, his relationship with Mike was beginning to fray. In 2020, Frank quietly disappeared from the show. There was no send-off, no farewell montage. He was just gone. For months, fans flooded comment sections. "Where's Frank? Is he coming back?" The network stayed silent until Mike Wolf finally addressed it, stating that Frank had undergone back surgery and needed time to heal. But that wasn't the full story. In a rare interview, Frank opened up. "He knew my back was messed up," Frank said of Mike, "but he didn't call me to ask how I was doing. That's just how it is." He revealed they hadn't spoken in years. The bond fans assumed was unbreakable had dissolved. And beneath the heartbreak of being left behind professionally was something deeper, an emotional and physical unraveling happening off camera. Frank's health continued to decline. Friends said he rarely left his home. He lost weight. He stopped appearing at collector events. Photos that surfaced showed a thinner, more distant man. A shadow of the jovial Picker fans had grown to love. And then, in July 2022, everything changed. Frank suffered a massive stroke. The news broke not through official statements, but through a simple Instagram post from Mike Wolf, pleading with fans to pray for his old friend. Suddenly, the silence made sense. Frank wasn't hiding. He was fighting for his life. The stroke left him incapacitated. Within weeks, a court appointed a guardian and conservator to oversee his medical care and finances. His days of backroad adventures were gone. He now lived in hospital rooms under supervision, his once vibrant world reduced to routines and rehab. The online rumors exploded. Some said he died and it was being covered up. Others claimed he was in a coma. For months, no one knew the truth. Then on September 30th, 2024, the truth came crashing down. Frank Fritz was dead. He passed away quietly, without cameras, without farewell episodes. According to his death certificate, the stroke combined with cerebral vascular disease and aortic stenosis was too much for his body to bear. He was 60 years old. What shocked fans even more was that Mike Wolf was reportedly at his side when it happened. The man Frank had once called a brother. The friend he said had abandoned him. No one knows if they fully reconciled, but in the end, Mike showed up. And that, perhaps, is what mattered most. In the aftermath, tributes poured in. Fans shared old clips, moments of Frank laughing, haggling, telling corny jokes, or lighting up over an old tin toy. To many, he wasn't just a television personality. He was family, a reminder of simpler times, simpler joys, and the beauty in forgotten things. And then, the garage door opened. In Frank's modest home in Davenport, Iowa, there was one place even the American Pickers cameras never ventured: his private garage. It wasn't just a storage space. It was Frank's personal time capsule, a shrine to forgotten Americana, layered with dust, cluttered with vintage toys, faded signage, and half-finished motorcycle projects. But buried beneath boxes, old tools, and moving blankets, something remarkable waited to be found. It wasn't a big-ticket antique or a rare Harley. It was a 1963 Chevrolet Corvair, its once vibrant red paint dulled by time, but its sleek, unmistakable lines still intact. This wasn't a car Frank ever showed on American Pickers. It never came up in interviews or fan conventions. To those who thought they knew everything about him, it was a complete surprise. But to those who really understood Frank, it made perfect sense. The story of how he found it is pure Frank Fritz. Years earlier, on an unplanned detour during a trip to a Southern California swap meet, Frank had gone looking for old motorcycle parts. He wasn't there to buy cars. He didn't have a shopping list. But tucked between rows of rusted fenders and chrome trim pieces, he spotted the Corvair. It wasn't a pristine showpiece. It wasn't even for sale at first glance. But something about the car, its design, its history, its flawed beauty spoke to him. Frank had always loved the underdogs, the oddities, the relics with a story. And the Corvair fit that description perfectly. The car, controversial in its day thanks to Ralph Nader's unsafe at any speed, had been misunderstood and maligned for years. But Frank didn't care about all that. He saw past the bad press and the faded paint. In that moment, it was his kind of car, overlooked, a little bruised, but filled with character. He wrote a check, called in a trailer, and had it shipped straight to Iowa. And when it arrived, Frank didn't parade it around or restore it for resale. He tucked it away in his garage like a secret, not for profit, not for show, but for himself. It was one of the few things in his life he kept truly private. It wasn't about resale value. It wasn't for the show. It was his reward to himself. A secret find that didn't need an audience, and that made it more meaningful than anything he ever showcased on screen. After his death, conservators considered what to do with it. Appraisers valued it highly. Offers came in, but then a handwritten note from Frank surfaced. In it, he wrote that he wanted the car to stay off the market. No auctions, no showroom, just memories, and they honored that wish. The Corvair remains in storage as Frank left it. But that hasn't. The Corvair remains in storage as Frank left it. But that hasn't stopped whispers. Some close to him have floated the idea of turning it and Frank's story into something more. A foundation, a mini-museum, a traveling exhibit, maybe even a documentary filled with never-before-seen footage, rare pics, and the quieter moments that didn't make the cut. Because somewhere, buried deep in the vaults of a network archive on old hard drives and dusty storage shelves, more of Frank Fritz exists than the world ever saw. Hours of road trip footage, forgotten pics, long, unscripted conversations with strangers in weather-beaten barns and backroad diners. The kind of moments that never made it to air because they weren't flashy or dramatic, but they were real. Producers over the years have quietly admitted that some of Frank's most powerful, most vulnerable moments happened off-camera or in the quiet seconds between takes. It was in those in-between places where the true Frank Fritz lived. He was more than the jokes and one-liners, more than the bearded sidekick to Mike Wolf. Frank was a man who connected to things because he connected to people. He understood that every dented lunchbox and cracked neon sign had passed through countless hands and lives, each one leaving its mark. His garage wasn't just filled with dusty memorabilia, it was filled with pieces of himself, each object a snapshot of a story, a moment, a person he'd once met. Friends say there was a tenderness to Frank that rarely came through on television. He would stay after pics, talking with owners about their families, their histories, their joys and heartbreaks. He loved the hunt, yes, but he loved the people even more. And maybe that's what those unseen hours of footage captured, a man who wasn't performing, but simply existing in the places he felt most at home. Perhaps that's Frank's real legacy. Not the Nielsen ratings, not the global syndication deals, and not the merchandise. It's the reminder that behind every old relic is a story worth remembering. Behind every collector is a heart still searching for connection. And behind every dusty tarp, an ordinary life carrying extraordinary meaning. Frank may be gone, but the things he left behind, both the visible and the hidden, continue to whisper his story. A story about valuing what others throw away, about listening a little closer, and about remembering that every forgotten thing and every forgotten person still matters. Frank Fritz wasn't just a picker. He was proof that the past still matters, that it's worth preserving, worth respecting, and sometimes worth keeping just for yourself.